Hello, and thank you for joining us on the Everyday Jesus Podcast, a podcast for everyday Christians seeking to follow Jesus every day. I am your host, Brian Boswell. Just a reminder, join our club. For less than 20 cents a day, you can support this podcast and help us get this message of following Jesus daily out into the world. All we are asking for is $5 a month. You can find us on our Patreon page, which is on our website, www.everydayjesus.net. We've got a great show in store for you today. First off, we are going to start a new series called American Idolatry. Today's topic, money. Then in our good news segment, we will look at an article about a picture of a Chick-fil-A worker praying for a customer that went viral. Our Unreached People Group is the Sunda of Indonesia. And in today's word, we're going to look at John 11, which is the death of Lazarus. So to kick off this new series on idolatry, let's first define the word idol. An idol is anything that you worship in the place of God. When we worship idols, we are in violation of the first commandment and quite possibly the second. You shall have no other gods before me, and you shall not make any idols. The first commandment covers the big picture. No other gods. We can't have any other gods. An idol is something that you make into a god. You are putting your trust in this idol. You are worshiping this idol. Now, some, like in biblical times, they were actual items of worship, like a golden calf, or in our time, maybe like a Buddha statue. Other idols could be ones that we can't necessarily see, like the sun god Ra, or in today's case, money. If you're like me, you can't see your money because it's in this invisible bank account in the sky, and you get paid via this invisible transaction that just shows up into your account, and then all of your money just magically leaves that account. So some gods we can see, others that we can't. And I'm not saying that money is necessarily a god, but we make it into a god when we worship it. So you've heard the old saying, right? Money is the root of all evil. Well, that's not actually the saying. The real saying is the love of money is the root of all evil. Money, like many things, is not inherently evil by itself. It's our love and our worship of it that makes it the root of evil. Now, people for ages have worshipped at the foot of money, yet walked away broke and lost. Others have amassed fortunes of it, only to realize that it can't be taken with them to the grave. Now, Jesus himself had a lot to say about money. Jesus seemed to talk about money more than he talked about a lot of other things like heaven and hell. Out of 40 parables, he spoke on money at least 11 times. This should tell us how important money was to Jesus. But why? Why is it so important? Why did Jesus talk about it so much? Well, I think Jesus spoke on it so much because he knew our hearts. You know, John Calvin called our hearts an idol factory. It means that we're constantly making idols. And money is one of those big ones. It's one of those that almost everybody suffers with this idea that people can be drawn into worshiping money. And we don't even realize it half the time. I think it sneaks into our way of life, and we get so caught up in our day-to-days that we don't pay attention to what we're doing. And that's where money can really be dangerous for us. Now, Jesus knew that we struggled with these things. Jesus knew that we struggled with idols. So I think that's why he spent so much time talking about it. And money is probably the easy pickings. Money's the easiest thing to notice because it's self-evident. If you just step back and look, you can see, where do you spend your money? What do you do with your money? How much time do you spend thinking or worrying about money? All those things should point you towards something. Either that you have a healthy relationship with money or an unhealthy relationship with money. Now, I think most people find it easier to trust God with their health rather than their money. When you get sick, it's easy to just pray, God, help me. Or you're on a daily basis and you're in good health, you're not thinking about your health. You just trust God that everything's going to be okay. People find it easier to trust that God will take them to heaven than trusting God will take care of them financially. Now, we tend to spend a lot of time in our lives worrying about money, especially if you aren't rich. All of this worry is really just another form of worship. We worship money because our trust is in it rather than in God. We think that we are secure when we have a lot of money, and we somehow become insecure when we have very little money. But money is always at the center of this security. How your bank account looks, that reflects how you feel. But it shouldn't be this way. Jesus says that we shouldn't worry about what we eat or what we will wear. God's going to be the one to provide for us. But the truth is, we don't really believe this. And we don't want to believe this. Money is one of our gods, and so we try to hoard it up for ourselves. We try to build storehouses around it. We think we are building security for ourselves and for our family, but in reality, we are just worshiping our false god. Jesus explains as much in the Sermon on the Mount. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. That's Matthew 6:19 through 21. Now, Jesus lays down a simple principle here. Wherever you find your treasure, you will also find your heart. Wherever you find your treasure, you will also find your heart. Meaning that you are worshiping whatever it is you treasure. What is the most important thing to you? Maybe for you it's not money. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's some other material possession. But whatever it is you treasure, whatever you think is the most important thing, that's where your heart is. And when we worry about money, when we store it up in greed, when we protect it at all cost, what we're really saying is that Jesus isn't sufficient. We don't really believe that he will take care of us. We just need to help him out a little. We need some insurance. We got to make sure everything's going to be okay. And then whatever we have left over, that's what we'll give to God, right? That's not right. That's not what the Bible teaches us. It teaches us that everything belongs to God. Everything. All of our money. We talk a lot of time in church about the tithe, 10% of your income, that belongs to God. That's not really the truth. The real truth is that all of your income belongs to God. Now, he may only ask for 10% from you. He may ask for more. But either way, all of the money is his. He gave you all of those blessings. You didn't earn those blessings. You didn't earn your money. God gave you that money. Yeah, sure, your employer paid you. You might have had to sign off on your work hours for the week, but your health, all those things that allowed you to work, God gave you those things. So our trust should not be in what we have. Our trust should be in what God will do for us, that God is the one that's going to take care of us. See, Jesus doesn't accept the fact that we are believing in his insufficiencies. Jesus doesn't accept the fact that we don't trust in him. Jesus said when we worship other gods, what we're doing, we're making them our master. Our worship is a service to them. We are serving another master. And he says as much in the book of Luke. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. You can't serve two masters. You have to choose. You're going to either hate one or love one. You can't love them both. And see, this is where I think we get tricked as Christians, is that we think that we love God, and yet we quite frequently love money. We show our love for money because, remember, where our treasure is, there our heart will be also. We show our love for money by how we treat it, by how we think about it, by its importance in our lives. Our lives revolve around money. And so Jesus is saying you can't have two masters, because if you're serving money, if your God is money, then your God is not him. You can't serve both God and money. A house divided cannot stand. Jesus doesn't give us an option. He doesn't allow us to take a middle road. You know, a lot of people will say, well, you don't want to be on one extreme on this side or another, or swing the pendulum the other way. You want to kind of walk that middle area. Well, this is not an area where you can walk a middle area. There's no neutrality here. You are either serving God or you're serving an idol. And money is one of the biggest idols in our culture. So you have to ask yourself, who am I serving? Who am I putting my trust in? When we look at our everyday walk with Jesus, idols are the masters that we are serving, and they take us away from Christ. Money is one of those masters. Now, we're going to spend the next few weeks tearing down some of those other idols in our lives, so I want you to stick with us. Next up is our good news segment. Today's good news segment comes from ChristianHeadlines.com. The title of the article is Chick-fil-A Worker Prays Over Customer in Viral Pic. The Spirit Led Him. This article is written by Michael Faust and dated July 24th, 2019. The list of ways Chick-fil-A workers go the extra mile for customers now includes prayer. Brittany Calden was eating at a Chick-fil-A at Madison, Alabama earlier this month when she saw longtime employee Stephen Spray talking to another customer. Soon Spray put his hand on the customer and began praying for her. This is according to the ChristianHeadlines.com article. Calden, a professional photographer with Brittany Calden Photography, snapped a photo of the interaction. It has gone viral. As a photographer, it was instinctual for me to document this moment, Calden told Fox 5. I find myself always searching for things that move me, and this is one of those instances. The moment caused Calden to tear up. He is a hard worker and was wiping tables minutes before approaching the lady. Mr. Steve, as he's known, has worked for the restaurant for 9 years. Mr. Steve never fails to walk up to your table and ask you how your day is going, and always tried to make your day better than it was before you saw him, Calden said. Spray told Calden the Spirit led him to pray for her. I work at a place where if I'm led to pray for someone, I'm able to do that, and I'll do it. I'll do it right on the spot, Spray told her. People need prayer, encouragement, and love. That's what we try to do here. Now, Chick-fil-A was number 1 in the 2019 American Customer Satisfaction Index, which surveys customers on their opinions about restaurants. It's not the first time Calden has seen Chick-fil-A workers assist employees in unique ways. As soon as we enter, we are greeted by our names. It's seriously unreal, she told Fox 5. They hold my baby when my hands are full and go out of their way to make us feel good. The other day we were leaving, and an employee ran for the door to hug my daughter before she could leave. They don't do that for the recognition. These employees have hearts that are led by Jesus, and it's evident every time we enter the restaurant. Chick-fil-A became the 3rd largest fast food restaurant this year. Its corporate purpose is to glorify God by being a faithful steward of all that is entrusted to us, and to have a positive influence on all who come into contact with Chick-fil-A. Now, I just love this article mainly because it shows something that we should all be willing to do. So the article is telling us about Stephen Spray, who's an employee of Chick-fil-A, and he's one of those people I think we can relate to. If you go to Chick-fil-A regularly, typically you see that there's these, a lot of times they'll have a worker in the local Chick-fil-A that's been there for years, and I mean years and years and years. And these people are just unreal. They love just about everyone that goes through the door. They're constantly in a good mood. They're so helpful. They're pleasant and kind. It's everyone that goes to Chick-fil-A regularly can probably think of someone like this in your local Chick-fil-A. And this Chick-fil-A in Alabama is no different. Mr. Steve, as they call him, has been at the restaurant for 9 years. And here he is, just in his daily work, looking for someone to pray for, looking for a spot to step in and to offer Christ to people. And I just love that. We should all be looking for ways in our day-to-day lives to find a way to, if someone opens up, maybe it's one of your customers, maybe it's somebody you work for, but if someone opens up and you feel the need that they need prayer, then pray for them. Pray for them right then and there. One of the things that I don't like to do is when someone says, "Hey man, will you pray for me?" is say, "Yeah, sure," and then just let them assume that you're going to do it when you get home. The truth of the matter is a lot of times you forget to do it when you get home. So this is one of those times where if someone says, "Hey, pray for me," stop right there and pray for them. Take that time to pray for them right then and there. Don't let another minute go by. You don't know what's going to happen later. God answers our prayers. The prayers of the righteous man availeth much. That's what the Bible says. So when we are listening to the Spirit, and the Spirit is guiding us, then we should be able to see these things. And if we're open, we're going to be willing to walk through those doors that God opens for us. So I just love this story. I'm just praying for Mr. Steve, and I just pray that blessings will be upon him and his family. Just loved reading this article. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Next up is our Unreached People Group. This week's Unreached People Group is the Sunda of Indonesia. The Sunda have a world population of almost 33 million people, and their primary religion is Islam. The Sunda is the largest unreached people group in Indonesia. What are their lives like? For many generations, the Sunda have lived in West Java. This is according to www.joshuaproject.net. This is where we get all of our information on unreached people groups. Traditionally, the Sunda have been farmers, both for their own needs and for commerce. Due to the fertility of the land, West Java is a great area for farming and plantations. This area has long been known as the rice basket of Indonesia. In addition to growing rice, there are also tea plantations, particularly in the mountainous areas. Secondary crops and fruits also grow well and abundantly. The Sunda are famous for their friendliness. They are similar to the Javanese, particularly in the way they dress and the way they farm. The Sunda people place more emphasis on family and openness, whereas the Javanese tend to be more formal and hierarchical. Industrial development and large housing projects have begun to change the way the Sunda live. Many Sunda no longer work as farmers. Many hold influential positions in government, while others have become competent business people. In Sunda society, there are 3 authorities with strong influence: the Muslim religious leaders, such as teachers, preachers, and worship leaders; the local government officials, such as the regent and the regent's staff; and the shamans with supernatural abilities and the martial arts teachers. What are their beliefs? Well, almost all Sunda are Muslims. In many areas, the Islam is mixed with Sunda traditional customs. And what are their needs? Well, statistical data on the inhabitants of West Java shows a high poverty rate. Because of this, the Sunda need help and guidance to raise their standard of living. This can be done by better development of human resources through education and training. There is also a need for agricultural investment and modernization. Our prayer items. This week we're going to pray against the spiritual principalities and powers that have kept the Sundanese bound for many generations. We're going to ask the Lord to raise up people who understand the Muslim culture and who can effectively share Christ with the Sundanese. We're going to pray that God will send Christian teachers to influence Sundanese children with the gospel. And we're going to ask for God to strengthen, encourage, and protect the few Sundanese Christians. We're going to pray that God will raise up qualified linguists to complete translation of the Bible into the Sunda language. We're going to ask the Holy Spirit to soften the hearts of the Sundanese toward Christians so that they will be receptive to the gospel. We're going to pray that God will open the hearts of Indonesia's governmental leaders to the gospel as well. And then finally, we're going to ask the Lord to raise up a strong local church among the Sundanese. And finally, it's time for today's word. Today's word comes from John chapter 11, verses 1 through 16, and it's on the death of Lazarus. Hear now the words of God. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. When he heard this, Jesus said, This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, Let us go back to Judea. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you are going back? Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by the world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. After he said this, he went on to tell them, Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. And Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, Let us also go, that we may die with him. Lord, bless the reading of your word. Now, in this passage, we learn of a few things. We learn of Jesus and his love for 3 people in particular, Lazarus, Mary, and Martha. And then we also learn that Jesus was close friends with these people. So obviously we know that Jesus was friends with his disciples. He had chosen 12 disciples. But Jesus also had some other friends, which I just find completely fascinating, that, not only was he involved with ministry, and he was involved with the discipleship of these 12 men that we call the 12 disciples or the 12 apostles of the Lamb. But here he is, he's just got some friends. He's got some people that may not necessarily be in the ministry per se. They're just regular people, but he loved them. And that's what's just so special about this section. Now, the main thing that I wanted to look at today in this section was about the timing. So we see that what's going on is that Mary and Martha send word saying, hey, Lazarus is sick. And by sick, they're meaning it's not looking good. They're not sending word because he's got the sniffles, okay? They're sending word because he is really sick. And when you're really sick in this day and time, if there's a likelihood that it's going to end in death. Now, Jesus is saying, hey, this sickness won't end with death. It's going to end with God being glorified through his Son. Now, Jesus loved Mary and Martha, but he waited 2 days. So he gets word that he's sick, and then he just waits for 2 days. Why? Why didn't Jesus, upon hearing that his friend was sick and on death's bed, why did he not rush to his friend's side? This is one of the hardest things to jive with. We know that when we talk to one another in today's Christian culture, in today's church, we talk about how much God loves us and how he wants the best things for us, that he's a good father. We talk about all these things, but here we're reading about Jesus who he hears about this man that he loved named Lazarus being sick, and instead of rushing to his side, instead of, we've already read about many healings that Jesus has done, yet here he doesn't rush to Lazarus' side to go heal him. Why doesn't he? I mean, naturally thinking, if you had the ability to heal one of your best friends and you knew that your best friend was sick and within days of dying, wouldn't you just rush to their side and say, "Be healed in the name of Jesus"? Well, Jesus doesn't do this. Jesus doesn't rush to his side. He stays where he's at for 2 more days. And if you're one of the disciples, you're looking at this and you may not understand this. You're hearing this story playing out in your mind and you're saying, why would Jesus not rush to this man's side? I know how much he loves Lazarus. Why is he not healing him? This is one of the hardest things for us in the natural realm to figure out. When we see healings not taking place, when we see people getting sick, when we see people dying, and we go, God, I don't understand this. Notice what Jesus doesn't do. He doesn't really offer a good explanation for this. The only offering that he has, the explanation that he has, is that this is for God's glory so that God's Son may be glorified through it. So here Lazarus was going to suffer, but it wasn't just a suffering without purpose. Sometimes we think that, man, this poor guy, he's suffering and there's no real reason behind it. Jesus says that there is a reason for it. The reason is so that God may receive glory. So God is first and foremost concerned about glorification, glorying in his Son, God's Son receiving glory. And so when we read about these sections and we see that that is God's primary concern, is to bring glory to himself so that God may be glorified through us. It's an amazing thing. So here, Lazarus doesn't realize it. Lazarus is just sick and suffering on death's bed, and he may not know why he's going through these things. He may be questioning God. He may be questioning, does Jesus really love me? He's not showing up. He's staring. You can picture him just kind of staring at the door of his house, waiting in anticipation for Jesus' arrival, and Jesus doesn't come on time. Jesus doesn't show up in his time schedule on Lazarus's time clock. Lazarus had a time schedule thinking, man, I need Jesus to show up quick because I don't know that I'm going to make it through the night. And he doesn't. He doesn't make it through the night. He doesn't make it through. Over these 2 days, at some point, Jesus dies. At some point over the next few days, Lazarus dies. And Jesus knows this. And he says to his disciples, Lazarus is dead. Lazarus is gone. He's not talking about sleep. He says, no, Lazarus is dead. But let us go to him. So Jesus is already telling you that he's going to show up too late. Jesus is showing up after the fact, post-mortem. Lazarus is dead. Jesus knows that Lazarus is dead. Yet, Jesus is showing up at the right time for God to receive glory. All of our lives, no matter what we're going through, no matter what kind of suffering that we may be dealing with, there is a purpose behind our suffering. And the purpose is always that God may be glorified through us, so that when others see us suffering and suffering well, when we're going through something and we do it to the glory of God, meaning that we're not complaining, we're not upset, we're not in despair, but that we are trusting in Him, that we are believing in Him, that our trust and our hope, everything that we have, no matter how sick we are, no matter if we're knocking on that death's door, it doesn't matter where we're at in this. The question is how are you suffering? Are you suffering well? And Jesus wants us to suffer well. It's not a question of whether you will go through something in this life. Everybody goes through something, some worse than others. But the question is Are you going to trust God in your suffering? Are you going to trust God in your suffering? And that was the question. We don't get an answer about whether Lazarus trusted God in his suffering or not, but we do get a little insight into what the disciples were thinking. The disciples didn't see where this was going. They didn't understand what Jesus was talking about. Jesus is telling them, hey, he's sleeping, and I'm going to wake him up. What is he saying? I'm going to raise him from the dead. The disciples are thinking, hey, he means sleeping as in just going to sleep at night. That's not what he meant. So let's not miss what God's doing in our life. Let's not get confused by terminologies and whatever's going on. Don't get caught, as they say, don't miss the forest for the trees. Don't get caught looking at every single tree and miss that gigantic forest that we're in. God has a plan and purpose for whatever it is we're going through. No matter how bad off you are, no matter how sick, no matter if you're on death's doorway, God has a purpose on what you're going through. Hang in there. Believe God is with you. He will never leave you or forsake you. Glory be to him. Now, I want to thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate all of our listeners. We got a great group of listeners. I'd love to get some feedback from you. Send me an email at feedback@everydayjesus.net. Please like and share our page on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. Send a note to us on one of those platforms if you like. Consider becoming a club member. We talked about it at the beginning of the show. We're just looking for a little bit of help in covering the podcast hosting cost and website charges. You can always get additional content and resources over at everydayjesus.net. I hope you guys have a very blessed week.